In today's video, we're going to take a look at my dust collection setup, why I'm sick of this unit, why I chose this unit, and everything I learned about dust collection as my woodworking business evolved over the years. Let's get going. Since most people aren't buying like $3,000 to $5,000 dust collectors, let's talk a little bit about what I started with. So when I first started out, I had a shop vac like most people probably start out with, and then I upgraded to like a $500 shop box. I think it was about $500 and 1.5 horsepower, which for the first 2 years, that was just fine. I had a combination of flex hoses and some PVC pipes along the wall. My friend actually still has the dust collector today, and it's still working out pretty good for him. The only downside of that unit was the dust bag on top, which I'll explain here in a little bit. Then since I was in my basement and it was kind of spread out, I added another dust collector, which was a wall unit, which was also a shop box, which I'll show you in a little bit. And I also have this dust right back here, which is by Rockler, and honestly, that's a great unit. This is the smaller one. It's 3/4 horsepower, I think 750 CFM. And for this here, this is great. And honestly, if you're in a small shop and you just have a table saw, a little DeWalt planer, and you're just using flex hose on each tool, I think that unit is honestly just fine for most people. If you can afford it, I would buy the larger unit, the one that's like 1200 CFM, just to have that little extra power. I would also buy the pleated filter on the bottom, which will take us into our next step here. So filters like this are a lot more ideal than those big bags, which my first dust collector had. And I wouldn't really recommend that because it just doesn't filter out the air quite as well as something like this. So this is an extra cost, but if you can justify it, I would get this. So let's go over to our other dust collector and I'll show you why. So this is on our other CNC here, our other Onefinity, and you can see all that fine dust that gets through there, and that's gonna go straight to your lungs. So ideally you avoid something like this that has this bag. They're also kind of hard to clean versus the big filters you can kind of just blow out with. So you can see these here. So these are what I blow my filters out with. I had this big one here and this little one. This is literally pretty much all I use this for, is blowing out them filters. Because once they get clogged, they lose a ton of power. But for my CNCs, like these are great. Ideally, I'll upgrade to another dust right like I did over there, just to keep this dust a little more maintained. I also have 2 of these units. This is a Mirka one, and I just use it for my other sanders. It would also probably be fine on just like a miter saw, but much more than that, you're asking a lot for something like this. I also have this Festool unit, which is amazing with the boom arm. You could maybe get away with one of these on a CNC, but overall, these are super amazing. They're quiet and they suck the dust really well, but they're just pretty expensive. I think this unit's like $500, and this one here is probably similar to that.
I was wrong. This thing is $750. Mirka sent this to me along with their sander, and I absolutely loved their sander until I had to get it fixed. Customer service was absolutely awful. I would buy something like this if you're on a budget. I don't have one of these, but I've heard good reviews on them. And this is the vacuum I have. Holy man, I spent a lot of money on that thing. $865. I looked on Amazon and I actually paid like $840 for it several years ago. But then I added this boom arm, so I'm like $1,200 deep into this vacuum setup. But I do love it, and I would buy it again if you can afford the steep cost of it. I use it for all my sanders, track saws, routers, and everything like that, and it works great.
So ideally you get a unit that's at least 1 horsepower and then has the pleated filter and not the bag filter. It's just gonna collect the dust a lot better. That's just my opinion on where you should start out with. So let's jump over to the big collectors and start talking about that. So I need to take this unit down and sell it. So before I do that, let's talk a little bit about it and why I chose to get rid of it. So before this, I had a C-Flux 3, which is Laguna's smaller model, the non-HEPA version. And honestly, I loved that dust collector. It was great, plenty of power. At the time, I had an employee, so running 2 tools and having 2 gates open. The suction started to suffer a little bit, but 1 gate open at a time was more than enough power. So I decided to upgrade to a 5 horsepower model, which is this one. Honestly, the 3 horsepower model had more power than this one. Right away, this was fine, but I'll explain shortly why this thing quickly lost power. So first off, I have a drum sander, which is the main reason I'm getting rid of this thing. And that drum sander makes fine dust. And that fine dust clogs this filter so fast. I blow this thing out multiple times a week. I blew my last one out maybe once a month, and it was just fine. So as that filter clogs, these things lose power drastically. And a new filter for this machine is like $500. I don't want to buy a new filter every 5 months because this HEPA filter clogs up and I got to replace it. So that's just not something I really want to do. So overall, I think it's a decent setup, but because there's no separation between the fine dust and the filter, It just clogs too fast, and it just needs separation. My other C-Flux had a big giant cyclone which separated the fine dust from the filter, at least kept most of it out of it. It also has these paddles in here which circulate. They maybe help a little bit, but overall I think they're pretty useless. Versus the Harvey has this like jet stream system where it forces air through the filters, which I don't know if that's better or not, but it sounded like an intriguing setup to me because I haven't had the best luck with the paddles. Like, sure they help, but not enough to really matter, I think. The dust comes in and straight to the filter. Also, it has a small bin. The bin is super easy to change and it's small. It's about the same size as my C-Flux 3, so to me that wasn't really an issue. But if you're someone that mills a bunch of tables and a bunch of lumber, this would get pretty annoying. The same with the Harvey. The Harvey has a small bin too, but I'm content with a small bin because I'm not really cranking out a ton of furniture anymore. I more so do like videos and stuff, but I do need good dust collection because my shop is an absolute disaster. It's just not the dust collector for me. I wish I would have kept the C-Flux 3 over this one. It's my fault though. I should have done more research before buying a $4,500 unit. I just assumed 5 horsepower meant more power, but I didn't really account for the fine dust clogging the filter. So that's on me for not knowing what to buy in the moment. Let's get some of this taken apart and figure out where these machines are gonna go. I decided to take a big step and kind of redo the whole thing because I designed it when I built the shop, and then since I'm switching dust collectors, I figured I would just change it up a little bit to make these runs a little bit shorter. So this is where the current unit is, and then it goes up, and I have this big long run that goes to these tools. But the dust collector's at the end of it, and that's where I need the most suction. Along with the bandsaw, it doesn't get a whole lot of suction either because that run's just pretty long. I'll also touch on why I went with the metal pipe instead of plastic a little later. So we're gonna take the Harvey, move that bench out of there, and put the Harvey in here and run this up here. Because then I can essentially cut off this whole chunk here and the run will be shorter. So that's the plan. And then I'm gonna take the 3D printer rack and that'll live over here.
And this is the problem. I just cleaned out this filter and this thing's just bellowing out sawdust, so I think the filter's just cached. I can't blow it out any more than I do. And there's no great way to do this, so I just kind of got to pull everything apart and just clean up. Then I can actually look at where like the tools are going to go. I don't really plan on moving the tools too much, but I'm going to shuffle them around a little bit. The shop needed a good cleaning anyways, just because like dust buildup over time is just not good. And honestly, this is kind of what I did a lot of. Just standing around, looking, thinking, and just kind of planning what I was going to do next. And I just have so many scraps, and it just takes up so much space. I got rid of like half of this, and I kept this, but just cut it down so I still had a place to store some of the better small pieces. And one thing I really appreciate is wheels. I feel like all tools should just have wheels on them, and like that X Flux 5, it was just so big and tall you just literally couldn't move it at all. And it's not like you have to move it, but it's nice to have the ability to. And then the Harvey cord was a little too short, so I wired this one on there that was like 3-4 feet longer just to get to the 220 plug I needed it to go to. I don't recommend doing this unless you're comfortable with electricity because poorly wired things are bad. And now onto the ducting itself, because this was something that kind of stressed me out when I was trying to plan all this because I had no idea where to begin. So most people probably just start out with flex hose, which is fine, but you lose a ton of suction because of all the ribs, and it's a pain, and you lose a ton of time switching that hose between all your tools. And I quickly found that inefficient, so I started adding PVC pipe. But PVC pipe also has its downsides. But we're going to take a second here to realize I'm an idiot. So I used my ladder to prop up this section here, and I needed an elbow, so I figured I'd crawl on top of the planer, since I was too lazy to get the other ladder, and I fell. Luckily I didn't get hurt. The only thing bruised here was my ego. Be careful and get help. It doesn't take much of a fall to get seriously hurt. I tried to jump onto my little step stool when I was getting off the planer, and it just slipped out, but yeah. So it's the following day and we're back to dust collection. The PVC pipe also has its downsides because it creates a static charge and it will shock you and you have to ground it. People say that that static shock can start a fire. I don't know if that's true, as I've read contradicting articles saying that there's not enough dust in the air and the static doesn't have enough power to actually ignite it. And the bonuses of being a nerd and having a bunch of 3D printers and modeling software is you can make whatever you want. So I made a couple custom pieces for the dust collection setup, and they just save so much time and money trying to find stuff to cobble together. And I just didn't realize how bad my dust collection was until I started pulling everything apart. I did not have these problems with the last collector. Another downside to the PVC pipe is it's quite heavy. It's drastically heavier than this metal HVAC ducting I have, so this would have been impossible to do by myself. Although the HVAC piping is a little more expensive, it's a lot easier to work on, but it also probably doesn't seal quite as well as the PVC piping. Based on the weight and ease of working on it, this is the main reasons I went with the HVAC ducting here. I did get the thicker version. I think it's 26 gauge versus the standard 30, just so it was a little more rigid. But look how bad this was. I pulled these pipes down and there was like 1 to 2 inches of just dust just stuck in there. So that was definitely affecting suction too, but look at that. Holy man. I actually checked these pipes when I switched to the new dust collector and there was zero buildup in there. Then I just took measurements and took a cutoff wheel outside and zipped these apart. They're super easy to cut with the 4-inch cutoff wheel. And then I bought a couple new blast gates, and then I just helped seal them up as they don't fit perfectly in the HVAC tubing, but it fits close enough to where it hardly leaks. And then to hold everything together nice and snug, I use self-tapping screws to really lock everything together, and then I seal all the joints with the metal HVAC tape, which I'm sure there's still some leaks, but it does seal it up pretty decent. You can get different HVAC piping that's like made for this, but it's super expensive. I think I paid like $500 in 2019 for like the thicker tubing, and it wasn't really all that expensive. So $500 for the whole setup isn't that bad. And then for like the legit woodworking ducting that's metal that clips together and seals nicely, you're looking at thousands of dollars.
All right, so we got everything set up. It's not done. I gotta get more self-tapping screws, and I still gotta put HVAC tape around all the joints to help seal it up a little bit. But we're gonna fire it up, see how it all works, get the first initial legit power up out of the way. I already fired it up, and I know it's not that loud. It's relatively quiet for the size unit it is. The other unit over there is pretty quiet too, and it's not much louder, but it's a little bit louder. It also has this little remote.
So as you can hear, it's really not that loud. It's relatively a good pitch too, because like the Rockler unit also isn't the loudest, but it's got a kind of an annoying pitch. My C-Flux 3 on the other hand, the Laguna I had before this X-Flux, was so loud. It was like a jet engine, and that thing was just kind of annoying as well. The X-Flux 5 is a little bit louder than the Harvey, but overall they have pretty decent tones and they're not all that loud.
All right, so I'm getting ready to take this thing down. And one other thing that really annoyed me with this machine was you have to unwire this every time to take this out to blow it out. And usually I have to do that twice a week at this point to keep it clean and sucking as much as possible. But I wired a clip in here so you could actually take it out versus taking out this cover and removing the 4 screws. It's just such an easy fix. All it needed was a plug. So now all I do is unplug it and pull it out, which I'm gonna do now just to make this a little lighter.
When I was looking at the manual when I first set up this machine, I thought this was pretty funny. A qualified electrician must disconnect the auto clean. So every time you want to clean it, you should make sure to call an electrician for a couple $100s. And then they took that section out of the manual on the manual I found online. So it doesn't say anything about unwiring the motor. It just says to pull this thing out of your machine and just blow that thing out in your shop. Which anyone who's blown out one of these filters knows that's just a horrible idea. You wouldn't be able to step foot in your shop for about a week. There'd be so much fine dust blowing around the air. And it also mentions emptying or replacing a filter bag. It doesn't even have a filter bag. So this is just copy and pasted from like another machine. So yeah.
And as you can see, the dust goes in here and then it essentially just goes straight to the filter. There's really no separation at all.
And now for the stressful part. Taking this thing down, just because it's so tall and top heavy and just awkward, I was pretty stressed out about it. But I kind of just bolted a come along to the top of the ceiling and just kind of lowered it down slowly and as safely as we possibly could. I was afraid to mount it to the ceiling as it just couldn't support that weight, so we just did it as fast as we could.
So I tore all these up to move the tools around and such, and these are just like my anti-fatigue mats. I got these on Marketplace a while back for a steal, but they're just getting pretty cruddy and the dust gets through all these little puzzle gaps pretty easily, and they're kind of annoying to clean around, so I found a replacement. All right, check these out. So we have a Tractor Supply, and I saw these stall mats online, and they're just 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch pieces of rubber. And these 3 foot by 4 foot ones are $35, and then the 4 foot by 6 foot ones are $50. So I bought 4 of these and one of the big 4 by 6 ones. And they're solid, so they're gonna be a lot easier to clean around. I can just pick them up versus those, they're just kind of hard to move around and stuff gets in between them.
And now my poor 3D printer is just getting covered in dust. Everything in the shop got extra dusty just pulling all this stuff apart. So we moved them over here, which gets them a little bit further away from the dust. And hopefully with the new collection, there'll be less dust in the air. I also have some air scrubbers, which do work pretty well. And I absolutely love these Craig benches. I added another one to the shop. I actually had one in boxes. I just finally put it together, and it's going to live back here so I can put more 3D printers on it. I'm just loving how everything's coming together. It also just feels a lot more organized, and just everything's just in a little bit better spot. And stuff's starting to come together. And it's so nice to have another bench to set stuff under and on. It just makes organizing stuff a little easier. Then over here, I just shifted everything over along with the wall control and the glue shelf. And then I moved the air compressor over the dust collector because it needs air to purge.
So now that I got everything for the most part set up, I still have some things to put in place, and I ran out of tape to help seal the joints. Why did I choose the Harvey? So Harvey makes 3 models of this. They make a smaller one. This is the mid-level, and then they make a bigger one. The G700 model is actually shorter as well, so you could put a bench over it easily, and the bin comes out of the front versus this one comes out of the side. So I'll just have to move this shop back here when I empty the bin, which isn't a big deal. So honestly, I'm just a big fan of tech, and I just thought it looked cool and it had a bunch of cool features. On top of that, I have several friends who own them, the G700 and the G800, which this is the 800, and they all gave me good reviews on them. I also watched a few YouTube videos, and I didn't see a ton of negative about it. It also lets you know if the bin is full, and another thing that really intrigued me was the air assist that blows out these filters. So you hook an air compressor up to it, and it purges to clean the fine dust out of the filter. Also, these are very good at separating the fine dust. So I felt like this checked a lot of boxes that my last unit just did not. And I'm not doing like full on production anymore. So I don't really need anything crazy, so I was fine going down a notch in like power, but also the power will probably be more consistent as it actually keeps the filters clean. This has 2 filters on it, which come out super easy, and these aren't $500 each. Both filters are probably half price of what that big unit is. So yeah, there's just a lot of small features that intrigued me. Also, you can actually set how much it sucks on the screen there. So if you just have it set up to like I don't have it set up to my CNC, but if you would set up to a CNC and you don't need all the CFMs this puts out, you could cut that in half so you're not using quite as much oomph when you don't really need it. So I haven't spent a ton of time with this unit, so it's hard to give a review on it, as I like to really use things before I review them, because I can't just say this is the best unit ever and I've only used it for like an hour and a half. But I do have a ton of stuff coming up this week. I have a big batch of stuff I gotta make, and it's going to the holiday season, so I'll get a little more busy then. So maybe I'll do a follow-up video on how I feel about this unit. Best case scenario, I keep it, no issues, and I love it. Worst case scenario, I end up buying a big Cyclone unit that goes here that's like a Clearview or like an Oneida. Based on my friends' reviews, I don't think that's gonna be the case, but I have pretty high hopes, and hopefully this thing keeps me pretty happy. So I hope I answered some of your dust collection questions. I'm probably not the best person to ask about dust collection, but I have been doing this for a while, so hopefully you can learn from my mistakes. If you have any questions about dust collection, leave them down in the comments. I'll try to answer them the best I can. And overall, I feel like it turned out pretty good. That run, I cut probably 12 feet off of that run and kind of segmented over to just this area. I kind of wish I would have done this originally, but when I built the shop and did all that, I didn't quite know as much, and I just felt like it needed to be over there for whatever reason. But yeah, overall, I'm happy with how this turned out. It took me about a week to get everything organized and moved around, but yeah. Also, if you're buying blast gates, buy the metal ones, not the plastic ones. The plastic ones suck. On the right side, push clean.